What's up, everybody? It's the Digital World Podcast. Today's episode, we're going to cover three things. The first is the collateral that's used on the Flare network. We're going to talk about what Brad Garlinghouse wants from the SEC lawsuit and what Brian Brooks plans to do at Binance US as its new CEO. So stay tuned. It's going to be short and sweet. Now, let's start with the interview that Brett Kimes and Mickey B. Fresh did with Matthew Rosenden with the Probity Vault and the Trustline app, which, if you haven't seen this interview, please go watch it. It's very good. It has a lot of details. And Matthew Rosenden's vision for this is for older generations to be able to use it. So the user interface will be very simple, and it's an app that anyone can use. So his target market is basically having the older generation be able to use it. So in other words, he's targeting everyone as a market. And so that's what's very interesting. So it's going to be very easy to use. Now, I thought this segment of the interview was by far telling of what kind of assets will be used as collateral more so. And it has to do with utility. Now, listen to what he has to say.
Yeah, so I think just given enough time, the advantages will be pretty clear because everything will be integrated together.
Also, yes, I would like to add to that, Brad. Also, Flare has all these F assets coming over there. Mm-hmm. So you have all this value in FXRP, in FLTC coming over, FXLM coming over, FDoge, which is now the number 5 coin, eventually FBTC. Now, Matt, are these also going to be available, and Spark too, as collateral to be used in Probity Vault?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. So I think the most important thing when assessing like what the underlying collateral assets will be is what is their risk profile. Mm-hmm. So I think that, there are a couple of different aspects to that. I think XLM would be like a good candidate because you've definitely got something similar going on to XRP, which is kind of that utility and cross-border remittances and actual utility propping up the price. Now with Dogecoin, I love Dogecoin. Yeah, I think that would be too much risk to introduce.
Okay, yes. But something like, say, how about when Bitcoin comes over, or Litecoin, for example? They have a lot of value. Would those be options that could be supported in the Probity Vault? Or is it strictly going to be more just a couple?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin definitely makes sense.
Okay. And Spark, obviously. Now, I guess I got to ask the question here because I know a lot of the viewers on my channel are definitely going to ask this. When you put your FXRP in the Probity Vault...
Okay, and so you heard him. So something that's more risky is something less likely to be used in there. And so with Bitcoin and Litecoin, I wish you would have let him talk a little more about it. But I feel as if there was a little hesitancy just because of, obviously it's speculation in terms of the value of Bitcoin and Litecoin, right? It doesn't really have the utility other than the store of value that people are talking about. Because for payments, it's too slow, okay? Now, I'm going to switch gears here with this interview of Thinking Crypto with Brad Garlinghouse, and this is what he says about what he wants from the lawsuit.
In your mind, what's your ideal scenario outcome here, given that we have this lawsuit, we have a neutral party of the judge in place, Gary Gensler coming in? What would be your ideal outcome?
Well, I mean, my ideal outcome or my pragmatic outcome? I mean, look, and I've seen actually people on Twitter talk about this. I want closure. I want clarity. For people who have followed this before the lawsuit, I've been saying for at least a couple of years that we have lacked clarity in the United States. In contrast, you've got major economies around the world, like the UK, like Japan, like Switzerland, like Singapore. I mean, these are not, really small economies. These are big economies with robust government infrastructure that have provided the clarity, that have allowed entrepreneurs, that have allowed those that would choose to speculate in digital assets to do so with that clarity and certainty. And here in the United States, we haven't had that. And so, someone had said, well, maybe I'm quoting a Twitter tweet roughly. Someone had said, well, if they walk away from the case, we won't have the certainty we've been looking for. Maybe we want to keep the case. We want to get to the closure. And I kind of agree with that. If we've been asking for that for 2 or 3 years, we're now, for better or for worse, we're on a path to get it. And
so he wants closure, and that's what we've been talking about. If we get closure on this case, we can have a regulatory or some full regulatory clarity for the digital asset XRP, which will then make it the only real asset that has that clarity in the whole space, who has full regulatory clarity. So can you imagine if there's a bloodbath in all the other coins in the market, but all of a sudden you see XRP rising up like crazy because it's being used for its use case? That's what's so interesting about this case, is because once it's all done and there's closure, there's I don't see an end in sight, because there is no end. It's infinite. People will be able to use it, and when utility comes to the forefront, the price is just no technical analysis will be able to determine where it's going to go. Last but not least, an interview with Brian Brooks, the CEO, and he says Binance US was set up as a separate company specifically because the US has its own regulatory regime around these kinds of assets, okay? He says we need better clarity in this country to let people productively invest. Let's see what he says.
Our next guest served as the acting controller of currency under President Trump, as well as the chief legal officer at Coinbase. Just this morning, it was announced that he'll become CEO at Binance US. That's the American arm of the crypto exchange, Binance. Brian Brooks joins us now. What was the thinking? Everybody has heard of Binance, I think. Binance US needed to be created to use all the technology of Binance, but the regulatory regime is different in the United States. Brian, is that how it works?
Well, it is, Joe. Let me just say, first of all, though, I've never been let in with a Michael Corleone reference, so I'm still kind of getting that from But look, here's the real point, is that Binance US and Binance are really entirely separate companies. And Binance US was set up as a separate company specifically because the US has its own regulatory regime around these kinds of assets. And obviously there are tens of millions of Americans who want access to this stuff. And as I tried to show at the OCC, we need better clarity in this country to let people productively invest in this new important technology. That's one of the things I'm going to do at Binance US, is to help continue to shape that dialogue.
And that's what he said. He's going to continue to do with Binance US what he did with the OCC. So could we see some moves here to possibly Binance US applying for a bank charter? I don't know. We'll see, but I think things are heating up. And I think this year we'll see a lot of movement happening in the digital asset space, because like Brad Kime says, they want it more than we need it. No, they need it more than we want it. I got that flipped. But yeah, it's true. Right now we're in a very tight spot, and we're going to see where this leads us. But I think we all know where we stand in terms of XRP and its utility and its use case. And so if you hold those, you're good to go. Hope this episode has brought you some value. Like and subscribe. Comment below. What are your thoughts on these 3 topics that we covered? This is the Digital World Podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.